So get this, Australia has the least affordable housing market in the English-speaking world.
We're in a situation in Australia where an average person can't buy an average home.
This is Federal Labor Education Minister Jason Clare, and he's one of the reasons why you'll never own a house.
A society will collapse when an average person cannot buy an average house.
2/3 of people believe young Australians will never own a home, and it's really not surprising.
House prices in Australia just keep going up and they're currently at record highs.
Australia's housing crisis feels complicated. We just keep choosing the wrong people to fix it.
You need $180,000 a year if you want to buy a house in Australia.
Owning a home in Australia has become a dream slipping further and further out of reach. What was once seen as the cornerstone of stability and identity, the great Australian dream, has turned into a nightmare of skyrocketing prices, impossible mortgages, and relentless competition. For millions of Australians, the idea of buying a house isn't just difficult, it's unattainable. Wages haven't kept pace with soaring property values, investors dominate the market, and younger generations are locked out entirely. Families are forced into renting for life, watching costs rise while security disappears. The housing crisis has reshaped the nation. Suburbs that once promised affordable homes are now out of reach. Cities have become playgrounds for investors, while ordinary Australians are pushed further to the margins. Even regional towns, once seen as safe havens, are experiencing price surges that leave locals struggling to stay in their own communities. This isn't just a housing problem, it's a national crisis. It's the collapse of a promise, the erosion of dignity, and the brutal reality that in modern Australia, owning a home is no longer the reward of hard work. It's a privilege reserved for the wealthy. And for everyday Australians, the dream of home ownership has been replaced with the harsh truth: survival in a system that was never built to protect them.
There are hundreds of thousands of Australians around the country who are unable to afford housing. And I have a question for you, Mr. Albanese. When are you going to put Australians first?
He's definitely not going to do that. So here's what you can do to combat the cost of living crisis on weekends. Start up a home servicing business. It could be something literally as simple as a window cleaning business, pressure washing, landscaping, lawn mowing. There are so many different options out there. And the beauty of these businesses is that you can start them, scale them up, and then subcontract it out to other people, and you can get to the point where you're not doing the jobs yourself. But in the meantime, you can do the jobs yourself and get that bit of extra cash on the weekends. And if you want to learn how to land your first paying client, then click on the link in my bio and I can teach you how.
You need $180,000 a year if you want to buy a house in Australia. And that's with that terrible 5% deposit scheme, which gives you 5% help and 95% debt. Instead of our government funding the solution, public housing, housing first, ensuring no one sleeps on the street, they are giving $20 billion to the householders.
What we need is to end the tax breaks. That's a capital gains tax discount and negative gearing, both of which are only making the rich richer. If we take that $20 billion that we're giving to these householders and putting that into the solution, public housing, everybody gets a house. End the house hoarding, fund housing first. Link in bio.
You can't have a house in Australia like this. This house just doesn't comply with 7-star energy ratings or disability access or most council approval requirements. But if you lived in fucking Thailand, that house is perfectly fine. That's an absolutely perfect starter home. Now, why can't you have a starter home like that in Australia? There's no reason not to. I mean, you're young, you can walk up the stairs, you've got outdoor living, you've got an indoor section, you could have the kitchen inside there and a bathroom, the kids would be perfectly happy. That house would cost you a fraction of what a compliant house in Australia would be. Now, we could still build it to the engineering standards, still build it to the wind code requirements, and save you a ton of money. But in Australia, not a fucking chance. They're not going to let you do that. And that's bullshit in my mind, because we have a housing crisis and we need to solve it.
A society will collapse when an average person cannot buy an average house. We're in a situation in Australia where an average person can't buy an average home. If we go to war, and we're on the verge of World War III, if you cannot afford a property in a country to own and live in, why should you be expected to go fight a war for that country? And it's so true. The fabric of society starts to break down when basic commodities like home and food, education, things like that are now beyond the reach of the average person. There is a fundamental bubble and issue in the way we're doing property and even like cost of living in Australia.
So I was talking about buying a home in Australia last night with my friend who's a qualified electrician. And he's not everything by the books, right? He's got like 50K in the bank, makes like 100K a year, no debt, been working since he was 16. He's like 23 years old. Like, he's got everything lined up. And he went to the bank to get approved for a loan, and they approved him for $450,000. He doesn't know what to do. He wants to give up. He's talking to me. He's like, dude, I'm so tired. I just want to I'm so done with this. This is what I've been working for. All right. He can't even buy a house where he lives. He'll have to move 3 hours away to some bumfuck town to buy something like this, right? This is the kind of thing that he's been approved for, which is meant to be what his entire life's work, basically. He'll have to keep working to pay that off. And there's no guarantee he'll even get this. There could be competition for this. It's so broken. I don't know where we're heading, but this country is not looking good.
Australia's housing crisis feels complicated, but we just keep choosing the wrong people to fix it. Right now, we're giving $20 billion a year in tax breaks to wealthy property investors. Meanwhile, couples like the ones I work with, earning 100K, 150K combined, can't afford a decent home. To me, that feels insane. I have even recently had a few people comment, okay, well, what's the solution? So here's what I would do. Cap negative gearing and capital gains tax discount to one investment property. You want a second, third, 10th property? Fine. But you're not getting tax breaks that make it easier for you to buy than a first home buyer. That's $20 billion back into the budget every year, plus the $40 billion we would get from our mining and gas giants once we start taxing them properly. Then I'd use that money to build public housing, not the rundown welfare housing we think of today. I'm talking about high quality homes that everyone can access and own or rent at a fair rate. Teachers, nurses, tradies, young couples, you buy or rent them at cost. No developer profit margins, no investor speculation, just fair prices for working Australians. And here's the key. We build so much that it becomes the new normal. Like in Singapore, 90% of people live in government housing. It's not a handout, it's just housing. We remove the stigma of public housing by making it the standard, not the last resort. Mixed incomes, high quality, well maintained. That's how you fix this. When housing isn't treated as an investment vehicle for the wealthy, it becomes affordable for the people who actually need it. That's not radical, that's just fair.
So get this, Australia has the least affordable housing market in the English-speaking world. In fact, they listed the least affordable cities. And what they found was in the top 15 cities, 4 of them were Australian: Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Brisbane. That list also includes Miami, Greater London, Los Angeles, Hong Kong. We also found out recently from the government's own report that of comparable countries and regions, Australia's had the second highest rent increases. Now, why is this happening? Why is our housing market topping the world for being so utterly broken and screwing over millions of people? Well, for starters, the Labor government refuses to phase out the massive tax handouts for property investors that are driving up the price of housing and locking out renters and first home buyers from buying a home. How does it work? Well, over the next 4 years, the federal government will give $175 billion in tax handouts to property investors. Now, what that does is property investors then go to auctions, use access to those tax handouts to bid up the price of housing and lock out first home buyers and drive up the price of housing. We also know that in Europe, which has had the smallest rent increases in comparable regions, as per the government's own report, well, they have widespread use of rent caps and rent freezes. Now, in Australia, we have no regulations on rents outside of the ACT. So what are our solutions? Well, firstly, we need to phase out those massive tax handouts for property investors. Secondly, we need to freeze and cap rent increases like much of Europe does. And finally, what this report also found is Singapore has some of the most affordable housing, and that's because they have a government-owned public developer that builds homes and sells and rents them at prices people can actually afford, exactly what the Greens are proposing to do in Australia. There are solutions on the table. Countries around the world have found them. All it means is taking on the power of the banks and property investors and property developers that are currently benefiting so much from the housing system that, while at the same time, those same groups, the big banks, property developers, property investors, wield enormous power over the Labor and Liberal Party. So we're going to have to organise a movement that can take on that power, take on the Labor and Liberal Party, who seem hell-bent on screwing over millions of people and refusing to touch the mechanisms and levers that could fix this crisis like countries around the world have. It's pretty clear now that it's not just a global phenomenon. that's going on around the housing markets, and we'll hear about how housing markets are unaffordable around the world. Well, guess what? It's worse in Australia. It is the worst. And the only way we're going to fix it is by copying solutions that other countries have used to fix their own housing systems.
For generations, owning a home was seen as the ultimate symbol of success in Australia. The reward for hard work, the foundation for raising a family, the promise of stability. But today, that dream has been locked behind doors that ordinary Australians can no longer open. House prices have soared to levels that wages simply cannot match. Even those working full-time, saving diligently and cutting back on every expense, find themselves priced out of the market. Young Australians who once believed they would follow in their parents' footsteps now face the harsh reality that home ownership is not just delayed, it's denied. The dream has become a myth, and the myth has become a weapon used to blame individuals for failing to achieve what the system has made impossible. Australians aren't failing to buy homes because they're lazy or irresponsible. They're failing because the system is rigged against them.
House prices in Australia just keep going up, and they're currently at record highs. We've got housing supply crisis. There's a lot of people who are unable to find homes, a lot of people who can't afford to buy their first home. And I've noticed this with the trend of clients that I've been speaking to recently. As recently as last week, I had a young couple come and meet with me. They're in their mid to late 20s, both on really good incomes. They're both earning over $120K each. They were lucky enough to have bought an apartment for $400,000 a couple of years ago. They wouldn't be able to buy something like that now. That is currently where they live. It's very small. It's a one-bedroom apartment. And based on previous history, I thought, oh, these guys are probably going to want to look at getting a bigger home at some point in the future. And I shouldn't have been surprised, but their main thing was no. We've decided getting the 4-bed, 2-bath on a quarter acre, that typical Australian dream. We don't want a bar of it. They can afford to borrow. They can afford to save for the deposit. What they don't want is to be, I guess, trapped and burdened by a 30-year mortgage with an extremely high interest rate that is chewing up virtually all of their surplus income, that limits them from traveling, limits them from, going out, eating at restaurants, having the type of lifestyle that they want to have. So these guys have really decided to prioritize living for the now, as opposed to, the typical 30-year mortgage, working to pay that off, etc. So I've just found it really interesting that's been quite the trend lately. And so the main reason they came to see me for advice was that they were saying, okay, now we do still have some surplus income. We still want to do something smart with that. And instead of investing into property, we want to invest into some really good shares and really good diversified investments, portfolios. We don't know how to do that. Can you help us do that in a sensible way that's going to help us in the future if we do decide down the track to change our mind, do something else? So that's what we're working on. We're creating a really solid diversified investment strategy for these guys. They know exactly how much surplus income they want to be contributing to it sort of every month. Previously, they had set up their own Vanguard ETF with a very small amount. They got about 20K in their Vanguard ETF. Not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but they just realised that they need something that's a little bit more sophisticated with a little bit more of a plan and a strategy behind it. It's very common. I'm seeing it happening a lot. In your conversations with friends, is this coming up? Is this something that you've been thinking about? I'm just really curious to see how the trend has changed in what young people are looking to achieve financially. And it's just really interesting that typical Australian dream is literally changing right before our eyes.
I'll tell you why you can't afford to buy a house, because the cost of construction in 2022 went up by a whopping 14.3%. In 2023, it went up 6.9%, and they're forecasting 7.5% every year for the next 4 years. Compound that over that period of time, and you're in a world of hurt when it comes to building a new home. When it comes to building anything, it could be just improving your home. The reality is the costs are going to keep going up. If your house costs $400,000 to build today, compound that over the next 4 years at 7.5%, and you've got a shit ton of money. Suddenly your $400,000 house is going to cost $550,000 to build in 5 years' time. That's just if we're being optimistic. The reality is it's going to get a whole shit ton fucking worse than that. Worse than that. If you aren't on the property market yet, I suggest you get hop to it and fucking get on there the best way you can, because it is not going to get any better and it's not going to get any more affordable. The reality is we let in 800,000 people in the last 12 months into this country, and we have just absolutely crushed the middle class and the opportunity to be able to get into the property market in Australia. I don't care where you come from. I welcome you all in here. I'm short of employees. I need people working for me. I want the staff. I want more people to come here. But God, I want to build enough houses for them. But I can't get local government, state government, and federal government out of the way to be able to do it. And the costs keep going up.
As home ownership slips further away, millions are forced into renting for life. But renting in Australia is no longer a temporary step, it's a trap. Rents are rising faster than wages, leases are insecure, and tenants live with the constant fear of eviction or sudden price hikes. Families spend half their income just to keep a roof over their heads. Young professionals sacrifice savings, unable to build a future because rent consumes everything. Pensioners, once secure, now face the humiliation of struggling to afford basic shelter. And all the while, landlords expand portfolios, investors profit, and governments look the other way. The rent trap isn't just financial, it's psychological. It strips away dignity, erodes stability, and leaves Australians living in constant uncertainty. Without the security of home ownership, every decision feels fragile, every plan feels temporary, and every future feels compromised.
2/3 of people believe young Australians will never own a home, and it's really not surprising. So that's according to a survey recently run by The Age, but it kind of ties in well to the rest of the news that's been around the housing market. It's hard to rent, it's hard to buy, it's hard enough even just trying to live. But according to this survey, and from those who already didn't own a home, most of the people affected were low income to middle income earners who thought that they would forever be shut out of the housing market. So since 2005, the median house price has climbed to 3.5 times the inflation rate and 2.5 times the increase of weekly average earnings. And rent has also increased. The report found that 42% of people said that their rent had increased in 2023 at an average of about $77. A recent survey by the Australian Council of Social Service found that people on job seeker or youth allowance were the most at risk, with 93% reporting housing stress after having to use 1/3 of their income on rent. And rental vacancies are at historic lows. There's only 1.4% of properties available for rent, and with 650,000 migrants expected to come over in the next 2 years, housing is just going to get worse. So the federal government had a scheme to build 1 million houses over the next 5 years, but it looks like New South Wales is only going to build 180,000, which falls below that target of 314,000. So there are a number of solutions like building new houses or relaxing planning laws, and in the Age survey, 72% of people supported building new houses outside of the city centre or the suburbs they resided in. That support dropped to 41% if the laws were eased to allow more homes in the person's own suburb. So SBS recently reported that there was an outcry in one of the wealthier suburbs of Sydney after a dilapidated churchyard was going to be turned into low-income housing, with lots of people saying that they had safety concerns. One resident even said that it would create a ghetto-type vibe. So it's drastic times, and now that housing is getting more unaffordable, the lucky ones of us have to choose between starting a family and having their own home. I wouldn't expect any drastic changes soon.
This is Federal Labor Education Minister Jason Clare, and he's one of the reasons why you'll never own a house. Let me explain. It takes tradesmen to build houses, actual people with skills that know how to put things together: roof lines, gutters, fascias, walls, cladding, windows, concrete, plumbing, electrical, all of the things that go into a home. It takes a long time to get a tradesman to a point where they can do this effectively. And if you've seen channels like the TikTok Inspector, you'll know the difference between shit trade and good trade. Your federal Labor government is committed to sending 80% of Australian students to university. 80%, which means that trades doesn't get kids anymore. They get to go to university instead. If 80% of kids are going to university, that means that 20% of kids are potentially left over to do a trade, to be able to get a skill set where they can build a home for you, somewhere for you to live. Now, out of that 20, maybe 5% take up trades, maybe 5%, go and do nothing but casual labour working in cafes, and 10% probably do 2/10 of fuck all. So that doesn't leave very many tradespeople. So where is the government planning on finding the tradespeople? they're going to import them. Imported tradespeople aren't great tradespeople. I've heard so many people recently saying that we need to import more people to solve our skills crisis. But that's total and utter bullshit. If you consider that we're going to send 80% of students to university, that's your fucking skills crisis. That's where the hole is, where the people are that should be working to build homes for people in Australia. You need to cut that university number right now and get kids into trades. And TAFE isn't the answer. TAFE doesn't create great tradespeople. Yes, some of you listening to this probably went to TAFE and you're pretty good tradespeople. But in the industry, we know TAFE places create fucking ideologically fucking corrupted people and more fucking members for the teachers union. That's all it does. In the building industry, we know the facts. The Labor government and its fucking education minister and all its fucking minions have fucked your ability to ever own a house. And that's fact.
So here we are. Australia, a nation once defined by the promise of the great Australian dream, now facing a housing crisis that has shattered that promise. For generations, owning a home was seen as the ultimate symbol of success. The reward for hard work, the foundation for raising a family, the guarantee of stability. But today, that dream has collapsed into a nightmare of skyrocketing prices, impossible mortgages, and relentless competition. This isn't just about housing, it's about dignity, it's about fairness. It's about the brutal reality that in modern Australia, owning a home is no longer the reward of effort. It's a privilege reserved for the wealthy. And for everyday Australians, the dream of home ownership has been replaced with the harsh truth. Survival in a system that was never built to protect them. The housing crisis has reshaped the nation. Suburbs that once promised affordable homes are now out of reach. Cities have become playgrounds for investors, while ordinary Australians are pushed further to the margins. Even regional towns, once seen as safe havens, are experiencing price surges that leave locals struggling to stay in their own communities. The dream has become a myth, and the myth has become a weapon, used to blame individuals for failing to achieve what the system has made impossible. Australians aren't failing to buy homes because they're lazy or irresponsible. They're failing because the system is rigged against them. As home ownership slips further away, millions are forced into renting for life. But renting in Australia is no longer a temporary step, it's a trap. Rents are rising faster than wages, leases are insecure, and tenants live with the constant fear of eviction or sudden price hikes. Families spend half their income just to keep a roof over their heads. Young professionals sacrifice savings, unable to build a future because rent consumes everything. Pensioners, once secure, now face the humiliation of struggling to afford basic shelter. And all the while, landlords expand portfolios, investors profit, and governments look the other way. The rent trap isn't just financial, it's psychological. It strips away dignity, erodes stability, and leaves Australians living in constant uncertainty. Without the security of home ownership, every decision feels fragile, every plan feels temporary, and every future feels compromised. Behind every statistic in the housing crisis is a human story. A young couple saving for years, only to watch prices rise faster than their savings. A family forced to move from suburb to suburb, chasing affordability while uprooting their children's lives. A pensioner selling the home they lived in for decades, only to discover that renting in retirement is unaffordable. The human cost is devastating, relationships strained, communities fractured, mental health collapsing under the weight of insecurity. Australians are living in cycles of uncertainty, unable to escape the grind of rent, unable to reach the stability of ownership. This isn't just economics, it's dignity, it's survival, it's humiliation. And yet, the government pretends this is fine. They call it market forces. They say it's challenging. They frame it as global pressures. But it's not global when Australians are locked out of homes. It's not temporary when housing prices rise year after year. It's not resilience when families are living in cars, in tents, in motels. They'll say Australians are resilient, that they're adaptable, that they're resourceful. But resilience isn't a policy. Adaptability isn't a solution. Resourcefulness isn't a safety net. These are survival mechanisms, and survival shouldn't be the baseline in a wealthy nation. The truth is simple. The government knows. They know housing is unaffordable. They know the crisis is crushing households, but they're not fixing it because they're not feeling it, because they benefit from it, because they protect the investors, because they sit on the boards, because they write the policies, because they cash the checks. Australia sells itself as the lucky country, a place of abundance, opportunity, and fairness. But what does it mean when the people who live here don't believe it anymore? What does it mean when citizens feel trapped, exploited, and betrayed? What does it mean when the lucky country feels like a scam? It means the identity is broken, the myth is shattered, the brand is hollow. Because if working full-time still leaves you locked out of housing, if renting consumes half your income, if the system keeps gaslighting you into thinking it's your fault, then what exactly are we proud of? Australia isn't losing its dignity because of global pressures. It's losing it because of choices, because of priorities, because of cowardice. And yet, you're expected to stay quit